The ultimate philosophical ideal for understanding the universe is the view from nowhere. It is the pursuit of a perfectly objective, position-independent account of reality, an observation deck completely separated from the subject it evaluates. For human beings, this ideal is structurally impossible. We cannot detach from the universe to observe it, because we are physical components of the exact machinery we are trying to study. This creates the condition of the embedded observer, a knelling system trapped inside the machinery it is attempting to map, subject to the physical limitations of the environment it occupies. This structural trap contrasts with our subjective experience. As documented by William James, we frequently encounter moments where the fog of confusion lifts, disparate ideas lock into alignment, and reality appears transparent and unmediated. This overwhelming sensation of clarity does not mean the observer has escaped the system. What we perceive as direct contact with truth is actually a misreading of our own internal cognitive machinery. The limits of human knowledge are governed by a double constraint. The first is the outer structural limit, the fact that no increase in intelligence or technology can allow an observer to view the outside of a system they are currently inside of. This matches established structural limits in the formal sciences. Kurt Gödel demonstrated that a complete and consistent mapping of a complex system from within that system is mathematically barred. The second constraint is the inner cognitive limit. The observer is a biological system whose processing fidelity fluctuates across different states. As Werner Heisenberg's work in physics suggests, the act of observation itself introduces instability. These two limits function differently. The outer structural limit sets a permanent ceiling on what can be known, while the inner cognitive limit determines the amount of noise present in how we process whatever sits below that ceiling. Rigorously understanding reality requires mapping both the shape of the container we are trapped in and the specific failure modes of the engine inside our heads. To identify those failure modes, we must define cognitive coherence. This term refers to the degree of integration and alignment among distinct internal processes: perception, memory, reasoning, and emotional regulation. When these systems align seamlessly, cognition reaches its optimal range. Processing becomes highly efficient, producing the subjective sensation of profound clarity, what Daniel Kahneman identified as fluent, low-friction cognitive processing. The primary epistemic error occurs when we assume this drop in internal friction indicates direct contact with objective reality. We treat our internal efficiency as a readout of external truth. In this state, the cognitive machinery has not stopped filtering the world. It has simply become so integrated that its operations are invisible to the conscious mind. Feeling absolute clarity is a measure of internal organization. It provides no guarantee that the resulting conclusions are actually true. What happens when the mechanisms driving cognitive coherence are pushed beyond this optimal operating range? Empirical research on arousal and severe sleep restriction, such as the work of Hans van Dongen, shows that extreme biological activation warps neurobehavioral function and impairs cognitive reliability. This can be modeled as a curve. As activation pushes past the optimal zone on the x-axis, actual epistemic reliability crashes. The system continues to process information, but its fidelity to the external environment is lost. Here is the fatal paradox. As actual reliability plummets, subjective confidence continues to rise. The more unreliable the processing becomes, the more certain the observer feels. This widening gap is the coherence boundary. Beyond this boundary, the biological drive to integrate information turns against the observer. It produces a state that feels deeply organized and meaningful while being minimally reliable. Normal cognition relies on a relevance threshold that suppresses random associations. This allows the brain to distinguish between a genuine signal and a mere coincidence. Beyond the coherence boundary, this relevance threshold drops. Associations that should be suppressed are promoted to consciousness, destroying the signal-to-noise ratio. This triggers apophenia. The brain continues to integrate data, but lacks external constraints, leading it to perceive massive, unified meaning in random noise. From the inside, this pathological over-attribution of meaning feels like a revelation of the universe's hidden architecture. Because the brain is at peak integration, every random connection feels necessary and profound. The feeling that everything is connected is often the phenomenological signature of a thresholdless associative system failing to filter noise. If this framework accurately describes the limits of our minds, why is it so difficult to recognize these constraints while we are experiencing them? The difficulty is geometric. Observer-embedded systems function like a Mobius strip, a structure with only one surface and one edge. From any fixed position, the surface appears to have an inside and an outside. An observer standing still on the strip will falsely conclude that they are viewing the system from a stable, objective vantage point. Perceiving the true topology requires traversal. This is the process of moving along the system's surface, experiencing the edges of knowledge, recognizing iterative loops in one's own reasoning, or engaging in empathic contact that forces a shift in perspective. Only after sufficient traversal does an observer reach the visibility threshold. This is the moment where the geometry twists and the framework stops being an abstract theory and becomes a description of the reader's own mind. Intellectual comprehension of these rules is insufficient. The framework only becomes legible when the observer has moved through enough of the system to inhabit the recognition of their own embeddedness. There is a sociological consequence to this geometry. Two people encountering the same event will operate with different relevance thresholds and different signal-to-noise ratios. This creates the observer gap, a structural disconnect that makes communication difficult, as each participant is calibrated to a different level of internal noise. Crossing this gap requires empathic coupling, a mechanical process where a shared coherence field pulls an observer along the Mobius surface, helping them recognize a topology they could not perceive alone. This carries a recursive danger. If the person attempting empathy is themselves operating beyond the coherence boundary, their perception is already distorted. Their empathy will likely magnify internal noise rather than ground the shared experience. Shared understanding is not achieved through data exchange alone. It depends on the precise calibration of two distinct biological engines. We face an inescapable condition. We cannot step outside the universe to verify our findings, and our internal machinery is designed to misinterpret certainty as a sign of truth. The primary defense against this trap is methodological suspicion. This protocol dictates that experiences of maximal clarity require the most intense scrutiny, not immediate acceptance. Any profound insight generated in a state of high coherence must be stress-tested later in lower coherence conditions to determine if the conclusion holds without the subjective feeling of certainty. In pursuing truth, certainty is a symptom of a cognitive state, not an intellectual credential. Clarity shows us where to look, but only external calibration proves what is actually there.